Well, hello and welcome. Glad you all could be here tonight. We are continuing, of course, in our study of Isaiah. And I feel like I'm not aligned where I'm usually at here. Isaiah 7 and 8 is where we will be tonight. And the title, Signs of Hope Amid Times of Fear. That sounds both promising and scary at the same time. So, Signs of Hope Amid Times of Fear. Our objectives tonight will be to reflect on the issues of faithfulness and unfaithfulness during Isaiah's day. We will explain the explain. We'll learn to type. We'll explain the historical background of Isaiah's encounter with Ahaz. And we will explain the issues that emerge around the birth of Emmanuel. So some interesting discussion there. All right. The theme of tonight's section will be Faithful Isaiah confronts unfaithful Ahaz during a time of fear and offers hope. So anybody know who Ahaz is off the top of your head? He is king. And not a good one, but he's squished in between two good ones, and we'll talk a little bit about that maybe just by way of some background stuff. But Ahaz was just not a good guy at all. So by way of review real quick, I like that he builds this review in. This kind of keeps some of the past things in the forefront of our mind. Helps us remember from week to week kind of where we've been and what Isaiah has been about up to this point. So Isaiah is most easily read as a book about the nature of God and how he relates to mankind. We've seen that over and over through the relationships that are portrayed in those first 6 chapters now that we've looked at. We saw God portrayed as the father of the people, and the people, of course, are kind of portrayed as that rebellious son. And then we've seen God portrayed as their physician, and the people portrayed as the people who will not listen to their physician's advice. And then we've seen God portrayed as the husband, and the people as that faithless bride, the bride that seeks comfort elsewhere other than with her husband who loves her. And then we saw the parable about the vineyard owner, and how God is that faithful vineyard owner who he prepared the ground, he prepared the best, choicest vines, and he built the tower, and he provided for the growth and all those things. But in the end, the vineyard did not produce because it was unfaithful. We saw in chapter 6 that God is the one to be exalted. He is the Holy One whose glory we can see. And so we've seen that God portrayed in that way, and rightfully so. We've seen 3 major topics thus far. We've seen the topic of oppression, specifically the way that the haves of society were oppressing the have-nots. The people that were well off in Isaiah's day became well off to a large extent because they did so on the backs of those that didn't have, and then they used their resources to continue to oppress the people that were downtrodden. We've seen the theme of judgment, or the topic of judgment, brought about time and again as God has this vision of what he wants his relationship with the people to be like, but we have the people rejecting God's vision. And because they reject God's vision, what is God going to do about it? He's not just going to sit back and allow it to just kind of slide by. He has a plan for what to do if the people reject him, and that involves judgment and punishment. But we also see this kernel of hope all the way through. We are never left without hope in Isaiah. Even when things are at their bleakest, even when things are at their most, most robust forms of judgment that he's talking about, there's always a kernel of hope that is left for us. And so that's good. That's the good news, that there's always hope. Okay, so that's the review of where we've been up to this point, and leads into where we're going in tonight's lesson with chapter 7 and 8. I wish I had been more. I told you last week to read chapter 7 and 8. Hopefully you did that if you're prepared for class and if you thought about it in time. But I wish I'd had you read these sections of 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. We don't have time to read that as part of the kind of the background for what's going on. But in my preparation, as I read through the notes and everything, I went and read those sections and really gave some good information about the historical things that are going on in Isaiah's day. So the kings that were led up to that point. So I think the king before Ahaz, I think his name was Jotham, if I remember right. That was Ahaz's father. And then Jotham was a good king, and then Ahaz was a bad one. And then Ahaz's son, as the king that is a very well-known king, was Hezekiah. And Hezekiah, one of the best kings that ever reigned. And so Ahaz kind of squished in between those two really, really good kings, and Ahaz was a really bad one. And so we have that context given to us in those passages in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. So take note of that, write that down, and go back and read that in the context of what we studied tonight. It makes for a better understanding of chapter 7 and 8. So on your handouts, of course, if I hopefully have them all done where you've got the bold, and I try to underline them. I forgot to underline that one, but bold and underlined text are things that fill in the blanks on your handout. So Isaiah 7 and 8 takes place between the years of 750 and 730 BC. Historically, that's when we would put the reign of Ahaz. So Ahaz, I think it says, reigned for 16 years. And then, so that block of time would happen during then. So these events take place during the reigns of Jotham and Ahaz. Continuing with that historical background, Jotham, it's identified for us that Jotham was a good king. And if you look at 2 Chronicles 27, verse 6, it says, "So Jotham became mighty because he ordered his ways before the Lord his God." And so Jotham had a good reign. His reign was characterized by good things happening within the kingdom because he put God's ways first. He ordered his ways before the Lord. And I really like just that, kind of that mental picture of ordering your ways before the Lord. I'm going to get up and think about what my day is going to be like, and as I plan out my day, I'm planning it out with God in mind. Or as I plan out what I'm going to do within the context of reigning over the kingdom, I'm going to plan out those steps with God in mind and with God and his ways in mind. So he ordered his ways before God, and God blessed him because of that. So that's the characterization of Jotham's reign as king. But then Jotham dies, as they all do, and his son Ahaz becomes king. And so Ahaz was a bad king. And so if you look at 2 Chronicles 28, verse 19, it says, "For the Lord humbled Judah because of Ahaz, king of Israel, for he had brought about a lack of restraint in Judah and was very unfaithful to the Lord." Very unfaithful. What's the worst thing you could think of a king doing? Jotham probably did, or Ahaz probably did it. He did it with his own children. Sacrificed his own children on the altar to idols. He made his children pass through the fire, it says. And that is, he took his children and sacrificed them to a pagan god. And so, I mean that's the worst thing I can think of a king doing, to show that they are not following the one true God, but rather following after the pagan gods of the nations that surrounded them. So
what was the point of sacrificing the children?
Well, it was done as an act of devotion. I am so devoted to you as my God that I will offer you the thing that means the most to me, which is my child. I will sacrifice them to you. It's not enough to sacrifice a goat or a ram or a sheep. I will sacrifice my child to you. And that's how devoted I am. That's how committed I am to following after this false god. Johnny.
I saw a little bit of a show this last week where They said that all started with Abraham sacrificing Isaac.
I can see the connection.
Well, they can say that, I guess.
Well, I can see someone twisting it. to
Yeah.
be something that's not meant to be.
But Abraham, God stopped him before he actually did sacrifice him, though Abraham was willing to do so. But I think the case could be made, it probably historically could be shown that was taking place before Abraham was ever requested of God to do that. And then, God makes it clear that he doesn't want that to happen, that he doesn't want participation in that. God never asks again after Abraham for that to take place.
Well, that's just somebody twisting it.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a twisted statement. So, we don't agree with that and don't accept that. And so, that's the king background of what's going on. Jotham passes away. Ahaz is a bad king. He is really bad. And so we're going to see more of how bad he is tonight, not just in what he did sacrificially. There were two major powers in the world at the time of Isaiah prophesying, and that would be to the north and east of Jerusalem was the major power of Assyria, and then of course down to the south there was Egypt. And I'll show you a map here in a minute that has some of these other kingdoms in it. And then in between those two kingdoms are the smaller nations of Judah and Israel. I think in your notes it might say North Israel a lot, but that would just be the northern 10 tribes, northern kingdom. So Israel, and then as well as Edom, Moab, Syria, and Philistia. And during this time, Syria and Israel sort of combine together. They form an alliance and actually lay siege to Jerusalem, but they are unable to take the city. And so here we have an instance of the northern kingdom actually going to war against the southern kingdom, fighting against them and laying siege to Jerusalem, but they're unable to take control of Jerusalem. Their goal is to come in and supplant the king that's there, supplant Ahaz, get rid of him, kill him, and install their own king that then they can control. But even though Ahaz is a bad king, why can't God let that happen?
Wipe out the remnant.
Yeah, he's got to protect the remnant, but who is, even though Ahaz is a bad king, who's he a descendant of? David. We've got to protect the throne. David's descendant has to stay on the throne. And so we can't have Israel and Syria teaming up together to come in and get rid of the king that God is protecting for the bloodline purposes, to bring about his own Messiah, to bring about his own son. So, Ahaz is a bad guy, but God's gonna see to it that his progeny continues, that he doesn't have, that there's not a question about who sits on the throne. And that kind of plays into some of what we'll talk about later. So the map of what we've got here, you can see some of those kingdoms. Assyria is way up here at the top, the Assyrian Empire, but then here you have the kingdom of Aram or Damascus, the Arameans. You have the Ammonites, you have the Moabites, Edomites, Philistines are here, Israel is here, Judah is here. There are other tribal areas out to the east, and then down here you would have Egypt. And so politically, there's a lot of Assyria and Egypt both kind of know that at any point, they could go in and wipe out any of these smaller kingdoms. But if they start doing that, then they've got a major kingdom that they're going to have to deal with. Because if Egypt comes up and starts taking out Edom and Moab and Judah, well, Assyria is going to take note of that, and they're going to put up some resistance. And if Assyria starts coming down and taking over these smaller kingdoms, then at some point they're going to have to deal with Egypt. So there's kind of a tenuous peace, just because they don't want to fight each other. But when Syria, which is the smaller kingdom of Syria, which would be, there's Syria, then there's Assyria, right? Assyria is the, wrong button, is the large kingdom up here to the top. Syria would be this kingdom here of Damascus, which is a smaller kingdom. Syria and Israel kind of team up together because we're surrounded by big kingdoms that could take us out, so it would be good for us to team up with one another. But then since we're teamed up, we might as well go pick on Judah. and they go down and try to take over Jerusalem. So there's lots of political unrest. There's lots of bad stuff going on. And so King Ahaz, filled with fear, chooses to seek protection against Syria and Israel. Now, where should he go for protection? I mean, there's somebody that's willing to protect him. Because remember, God's made some pretty significant promises to Ahaz's forefather, David, that he's going to keep a king on the throne. And Ahaz is in that bloodline. And if Ahaz knows God and he understands God, he should see that God has some interest in keeping him on the throne. But Ahaz doesn't know God. Ahaz is following his own thing. And so Ahaz seeks protection against Syria and Israel. Isaiah comes to Ahaz and is filled with faith, and he chooses to trust God, and he counsels Ahaz to trust God. Don't seek help from anyone other than God. But Ahaz is going to choose to seek help from Assyria, because Assyria is a big, powerful nation. And it's the big, powerful nation that's, if you go back to the map, is right up here on the border of Syria, closer to Israel. And if Ahaz can get Assyria to come down and take care of these two, well, then that should protect us, right? Well, maybe, except that when Assyria has gone to all the trouble of wiping out Damascus and Israel, why should they not go on down to Jerusalem and take them out too? Why should they not just continue down? We've got the gears of war rolling. We might as well just go down and conquer everybody. And so that kind of sets some pretty significant historical events into motion, because Ahaz refuses to trust God. No surprise that he refuses to trust God, because he was sacrificing his own children to pagan gods. But it sets some bigger things into motion. So those are the things that we're gonna look at these things in more detail as we go through. We're kind of getting the background here, and then that leads up to the things that are going to take place in Isaiah 7 and 8, the things that Isaiah talks about. And here's what we've got coming. Our preview here tonight is that Isaiah is going to make his case to trust in God. He first makes his case with Ahaz, just privately, and when Ahaz rejects it, Isaiah is going to make his case to the people. And then finally, to the faithful, which I think in the handout or in the notes, he calls them Isaiah's disciples. These would be people that are willing to listen to what Isaiah has, which is a smaller group of people than you would hope. But there are people that are willing to listen to what Isaiah has to say. Just not the people we wish that would listen to it. So let's jump in. Now that we've used up nearly half the class time, let's start actually get into the text. We've got to cover 2 chapters tonight, so listen fast. We've got, we're going to take a section at a time. I think in your handout it's got those that box section with the breakdown of how that's going to go. So we'll look first at verses 1 and 2, which he calls the crisis. So 7, 1 and 2 says, "Now it came about in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Aram, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up to Jerusalem to wage war against it, but could not conquer it. When it was reported to the house of David, saying the Arameans have camped in Ephraim, his heart and the hearts of his people shook as the trees of the forest shake with the wind." So this is referred to as the Syro-Ephraimite War. Syro would be Syria. Ephraimite was often a euphemism used for those northern tribes of Israel. So the Syro-Ephraimite War creates crisis in Jerusalem, because they have allied with one another and decided that they're going to go down and conquer Jerusalem. And their goal, we're told in those in the historical books, Kings and Chronicles, their goal is to go and wipe out the kingdom and put their own king on the throne. Ahaz, trembling with fear, must decide on a course of action, and it even describes the way that he trembles. It's shaking like the forest shakes in the wind. We've seen in Kansas, we see the trees shaking in the wind. We understand what that's like. And so Ahaz knows he can't defeat them. He doesn't have the military might. He doesn't have the power to defeat them militarily, and so he's got to come up with a plan to protect himself. Verses 3 through 6. "Then the Lord said to Isaiah, 'Go out now to meet Ahaz, you and your son Shear-Jashub, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the fuller's field, and say to him, take care and be calm, have no fear, and do not be faint-hearted because of these two stubs of smoldering firebrands, on account of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram and the son of Remaliah. Because Aram with Ephraim and the son of Remaliah has planned evil against you, saying, let us go up against Judah and terrorize it, and make for ourselves a breach in its walls, and set up the son of Tabeel as king in the midst of it. So Isaiah offers direction. He goes and meets with, he goes up to meet with Ahaz, and he is unfettered by fear. He is full of faith in God, and he brings salvation in the form, a salvation oracle with these four imperatives. Take heed, be aware of what's going on. Take heed to the things that I'm saying. Listen to what I have to say. Take heed. Be quiet. Quit your complaining. This is bigger than you, but it's not bigger than God. And so calm down your shaking nerves. Be quiet and just listen for once. Do not fear, which, in all fairness to Ahaz, how often when you were a little kid, you were scared of the dark and your mom said, oh, quit, don't be so afraid. Did that really work? Not really. Now I was just scared of mom too. And scared of the dark still. So, telling somebody who's scared, don't be scared, has limited effects. But Isaiah had the evidence to back it up. He had a message from God. He had a direct revelation from God to be able to say, this is going to be okay. Don't be afraid. And then do not let your heart faint. Don't give up hope. And so we've talked about that already tonight in the review, that sprinkled all throughout Isaiah are always these messages of hope. And here Isaiah, speaking to the evil King Ahaz, extends hope to Ahaz. Ahaz doesn't deserve hope, but God still is willing to extend hope to Ahaz. And so that's the counsel that Isaiah offers. It's very good counsel. Verses 7 through 9, we have a confirmation of the things that Isaiah has said. He says, thus says the Lord God, it shall not stand, nor shall it come to pass. For the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. Now within another 65 years, Ephraim will be shattered, so that it is no longer a people. And the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Remaliah. If you will not believe, you surely shall not last. This is a section of fear versus faith. And the event that Ahaz fears will not take place. That's what God is promising him here. He says, you are scared of something that you think is going to happen, but I know it's not going to happen. You see this army coming to Jerusalem. You know what their plan is. You're fearful for that event will happen, but it's not going to. That event will not take place. So Isaiah is making confirmation of the things that God is saying here. He's Ahaz. The two statements about faith. Isaiah calls Ahaz to be faithful. Think about that for a second. Has Ahaz ever shown any indication that he wants to be faithful or that he knows how to be faithful? I think there's a good lesson there for us, that God is always calling us to faithfulness. No matter how far we fall, there's still always that beckon back into faithfulness. That God is always willing for us to return to faithfulness. And then Jerusalem's stability depends on faith, which is a little bit scary, because if Ahaz can't produce faith and Jerusalem's stability depends upon faith, where is that stability going to come from? Well, other people are going to have to step into the gap. And Isaiah is demonstrating faithfulness. And so we're going to have to see if Isaiah's faithfulness is going to be enough to see us through the events that are about to unfold.
Jason?
Yes, sir.
One of the things that struck me when reading those verses was time frames.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there's Ahaz saying, hey, these guys are going to come and beat on me now, and you're telling me in 65 years something will happen.
Right.
God's time frame is just so much different than ours.
It is, and his view of the present and the future and all those things are so different than ours. But you're right. I mean, the thing that Ahaz fears is that they're going to come take over my kingdom and take it away from me. And Isaiah says, no, in 65 years, they're doomed. Well, what about the next 65 years? Are they going to take it from me for 65 years and then they're doomed and we get it back? Well, I can see how Ahaz would still have a question about that, but you're right. Isaiah is saying, no, God has a plan. God is going to move in this instance to protect his plan, and he's not going to let a kingdom that's doomed to failure in the next 65 years come in and take over the kingdom that he has promised a future to. And he has promised a future to the descendant of David. And so he's not going to allow that to happen. Verses 10 to 13, we have here as a call for decision. And listen to what Isaiah says. It says, then the Lord, and I think here it says, then the Lord spoke, but we understand that the Lord is speaking through Isaiah to Ahaz. And so when it says the Lord spoke, I think we're hearing God's voice through Isaiah. So it says, then the Lord spoke again to Ahaz, saying, ask for a sign for yourself from the Lord your God. Make it deep as Sheol or high as heaven. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, nor will I test the Lord. Then he said, listen now, O house of David, is it too slight a thing for you to try the patience of men, that you will try the patience of God as well? Wow. I mean, this is like the climactic moment here, where God says, look, you're doubting what I've said to you, right? You're doubting my promise that I'm going to make it okay. So you know what? Ask me for anything. Ask me for a sign. Ask me for a way to prove to you that what I'm saying is true. How many times in your life would you like to go back and would you like to have that offer from God? I can think of a few times in my life where, oh, God, please give me a sign. Please allow me the opportunity to ask you for a sign. Please allow me the faith-building experience that it would be for me to ask, like Gideon did with the fleece. Or, to be able to ask for something like that of God, and for God to approve it beforehand, where he says, go ahead and ask. It's okay. Ask me.
We can still ask God questions of our lives.
Absolutely.
That are happening. But it's always in retrospect that faith is truly grown, because then you can look back and see how God worked in that.
God is not fearful of our questions.
No, and it's okay to ask.
Yeah.
But we want to make sure that we accept what
Yeah.
answer we have through his word.
Sure. And now,
then the outcome of it is according to his will.
Yeah.
Whether or not we like it or not.
and I just think of this offer that God makes to Ahaz, and the offer that is extended to a man who has demonstrated unfaithfulness every step of the way, who has demonstrated that he doesn't care about God. He doesn't know God. But here, what is Ahaz's response?
He doesn't want to put God to the test.
Now Ahaz presumes to know more about God than Isaiah does, because Isaiah is making this offer in the place of God, and through God's voice is being spoken through Isaiah, and Isaiah offers to Ahaz, and Ahaz says, I saw this coming a mile away. I'm not falling for that trap, because I know there's a verse back there somewhere that says, don't put the Lord your God to the test. Deuteronomy 16, I think. But Jesus quotes that verse when he's being tempted, right? When he's up on the top of the temple and the devil says, cast yourself out, because he has said, lest you dash your foot against a stone. And Jesus said, no, don't put the Lord your God to the test. I'm not going to test God. And so Ahaz here, who has been offered the opportunity by God to ask for a test, now says, no, I presume to know God well enough that I'm not going to put him to the test. Well, goodness. Johnny.
I think this is Ahaz showing that he kind of thinks that God may actually be there, but he doesn't want God to show himself.
Right.
I don't believe in you. If I test you and then it shows that you're actually there, then I'm in trouble.
If I ask for a purple zebra to show up on my doorstep and there's a purple zebra, now I've got to do what you want me to do. But if I say, no, I'm not going to put God to the test, then it's still in my hands to be able to make my own decision about what I want to do. Because Ahaz knows that what Isaiah is saying is we put our trust in God, we don't put our trust in Assyria, but Ahaz really wants to put his trust in Assyria. He really wants to go to Assyria for help. And so he's not going to take this way out that God offers him. And so, so this is just an incredible moment as I was reading through this and thought, my goodness, as I look back at my life, I wish God would have sent Isaiah to me at one or 2 points in my life and said, ask me for anything as a sign. Not ask me for $1 million, but ask me for a sign. Make the Mississippi River flow backwards for a day, or make whatever the sign is, ask me for anything and I'll make it happen. And that's your sign that I will protect you through this siege. You don't have to turn to Assyria.
How does your 7:10 read?
7:10 says, then the Lord spoke again to Ahaz saying.
The Lord spoke to Ahaz and he didn't get it.
Yeah.
How's that possible?
I think, because we have,
You think it's
in verse 3, I think, then the Lord spoke to Isaiah and he's putting the words into Isaiah's mouth. I really believe it's Isaiah speaking on the Lord's behalf. Isaiah is the prophet. I wouldn't kick anybody out of my life that thought it was the Lord speaking directly to Ahaz, but I see it as God speaking through Isaiah.
Because it almost has to be, because
Yeah.
you can't, if God was in your presence speaking to you,
Right.
I can't imagine saying no.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's what we have here. So, and then in verse 14, I think so verse 13 is where we ended that reading, and it says, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. I don't think that's the Lord speaking of himself in the third person. I think that's Isaiah speaking about God. And so, but using God's words that he is giving Isaiah. So, Ahaz, and this was an interesting comment in the notes, Ahaz refuses on the premise of upholding doctrine. All of a sudden, doctrine becomes real important to Ahaz. Forget that doctrine about not sacrificing your children. That doctrine, we've washed that one away. But all of a sudden, the doctrine of not putting the Lord your God to the test becomes very important to me, because I'm going to use that doctrine the way I want it to be used. And that's an interesting thought that I think maybe we need to take into consideration now and again as we love our doctrine. We really do, and I love our doctrine. I'm not preaching against doctrine, but do we ever use doctrine to avoid doing what God wants us to do? We have examples of that in the New Testament where the Pharisees were supposed to take care of their parents, but what did they do? They said, no, I'm going to give that money to God instead, and so I don't have to take care of my parents now. Or we have the Pharisees saying, well, we can't work on the Sabbath, and therefore, if your house is burning down on the Sabbath, well, sorry for that. We're just going to sit and watch it burn because we're not going to help you. We're not going to do any work on the Sabbath. There was all kinds of things like that where they were using doctrine to abuse people. And I think we just have to, we have to make sure that we are faithful to God, not faithful, can I say it? Not faithful to doctrine.
Well, we don't want to use it as a weapon
Yeah.
ever against somebody.
We want to make sure that our
It's
faith,
proper.
that our trust is in God, not in doctrine. I think it's okay to say that, isn't it? I'm looking for elders to nod their head yes.
Well, it's a matter of the heart.
Yeah.
It's just like I think you were teaching within the last week, we've been teaching about how they were supposed to do what the law commanded, but they
Right.
were also supposed to pray from the heart.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Ahaz is not doing this from the heart.
Right.
He's doing this as a tool to do what he wants.
Right. Doctrine is not a chess game to be manipulated and maneuvered in a way that gains us something. It's to be done from the heart in a way that honors God.
Well, if we do it without love, we're a noisy gong.
There you go. We have to do it with love. There you go. Okay. Well, like I said, I feel like that's a climactic moment in the text where Ahaz really is making his choice. He's drawn his line in the sand. And so what happens next is a reaction to that. It's almost like God, not that God doesn't know what Ahaz is going to say, but if Ahaz agrees, this goes one direction. If Ahaz does not follow God, it's got to go a different direction. And so as we're reading it, we don't know which way it's going until we read it, but God, of course, knows which way it's going before that. So next we have consequences. What are the consequences of Ahaz making this decision? Well, we're going to see a series of consequences that are brought out. So the first one here is mentioned in verses 14 to 17. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. And he will eat curds and honey at the time he knows enough to refuse evil and choose good. For before the boy will know enough to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose two kings you dread will be forsaken. Okay, so here we have the sign of Emmanuel. And there's two components to that. Number one, that God will be with his people. Is this a surprise?
No.
How often have we heard God wants to be with his people? Like always, right? Over and over and over again, we hear that God wants to be with his people. Go back to Exodus 19, the covenant that God makes with Moses. You know, I will be your God, you will be my people, and I will be with you. I'll be in your midst. Later on, when God says, you're going to have to take these people on your own, because if I'm with them, I'm going to kill them all, because I can't stand to be in their presence because they're sinners. And Moses said, if you don't go with us, we're not leaving. We can't leave. You've got to be with us. And Moses stands up for that principle that God has to be with his people. And God does. God relents and says, okay, I'll go with you, but you better watch yourselves, right? And so God goes with his people, and all the time he's with his people. So this promise of a sign that God will be with his people, he's been promising that all along. Is this really that special of a thing? Johnny?
This whole thing, and if we look at it as the big picture, we all have choices in our lives.
Yes.
And those choices have consequences.
Yes.
And those choices, if we choose what God wants us to do, he's going to be with us and bless us. If we choose not to have God in our life, then the consequences are going to be bad. Right.
I can't argue with that. We see that premise taught over and over in the Bible as well. God affirms the hope that through this promise as well. The hope that, you know, at the end of the reading there, before the boy will know enough to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose two kings you dread will be forsaken. So these two kings that, you know, that go back a couple of verses where we talk about it, 65 years from now, Israel is no more. They get taken, the Assyrians finally wipe out that kingdom, and it's gone. And the same thing is going to happen to the Syrians, to Damascus. Damascus is going to fall. We have this promise here. Now, what do we know this promise points us to ultimately? It ultimately points to Christ. We know that because Matthew uses this verse at the birth of Christ to demonstrate that Christ is the fulfillment, the ultimate fulfillment of this verse. That's 750 years from now. Is that really what this verse means in the immediate context, that we have to wait 750 years for Ahaz to get his comeuppance and for Isaiah's promise of God being with his people to be fulfilled? That's the only thing that can fulfill this. I think there has to be an immediate context in which this verse makes sense. Just like back earlier we asked, you know, is God's view of time is different than ours, but is it really just a matter of waiting 65 years for Ephraim to be destroyed so that Ahaz has the opportunity to say yes to this offer? No, there's a more immediate context to that.
Well, it's living a life of faithfulness. Living a life of faithfulness.
Sure, living a life of faithfulness that's what God is calling him to from the very beginning. And Ahaz, just like there would be an immediate benefit to Ahaz making that choice, an immediate benefit of God's protection, there also are immediate consequences of what's going to happen if he doesn't accept God's will. It's not, okay, wait 750 years and then boom, we're going to get you for not following God. There is an immediate context to this. Verses 14 through 17 also However, if Ahaz chooses to ally with Assyria, it will end with Assyria invading and conquering Jerusalem. So he has this choice of faithfulness, which protects him from the fate that he fears, and faithlessness, which it's not going to be Syria and Israel that destroy Jerusalem, but it will eventually be Assyria is going to come in, and there's going to be bad things that happen there. So, it's not the thing that Ahaz fears, but it's a thing that Ahaz fears. It's going to be a different thing that happens. So, Ahaz may think he's dodging the consequences, but really he's just unfolding a whole new series of consequences. We are quickly running out of time. Verses 16 to 25 says, for the boy will know enough to refuse evil and good. I already read that. Verse 17, the Lord will bring on you, on your people, and on your father's house such days as have never come since the day that Ephraim separated from Judah, the king of Assyria. And it will come about in that day that the Lord will whistle for the fly that is in the remotest part of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. And they will come and settle on the steep ravines, on the ledges of the cliffs, on all the thorn bushes, and on all the watering places. And that day the Lord will shave with a razor, hired from regions beyond the Euphrates, that is, with the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the legs, and will also remove the beard. Now it will come about in that day that a man may keep alive a heifer and a pair of sheep. And it will happen that because of the abundance of the milk produced, he will eat curds, for everyone that is left within the land will eat curds and honey. And it will come about in that day that every place where they used to be 1,000 vines, valued at 1,000 shekels of silver, will become briars and thorns. People will come there with bows and arrows, because all the land will be briars and thorns. And as for all the hills which used to be cultivated with the hoe, you will not go there for fear of briars and thorns, but they will become a place for pasturing oxen and sheep to trample. So, more consequences. Isaiah reveals the result of Ahaz's plan to Ahaz. If you follow through on your plan to ally with Assyria, here's what's going to happen. Assyria is going to hurt you. They're going to hurt you bad. Ahaz seeks help from Assyria in 2 Kings 16:7. Ahaz destroys Syria. That's a good thing, because Syria was the immediate threat to Judah in 2 Kings 16:9. They also destroy northern Israel in 2 Kings 17. Not necessarily a good thing, because those are our brothers, but we've been fighting with them, so in the immediate context it gives Judah protection from Israel. But then, 2 Chronicles 28, Assyria attacks Judah. It's exactly what God said was going to happen. Ahaz, if you go through with this plan, it's going to look at first like it was a good idea, but ultimately it was a really bad idea. And that's the whole gist of this passage, that the land that you thought you were protecting, that you thought you were providing for, is going to end up trampled underfoot, because it was not a good plan from the beginning.
What you just said ties into what Johnny said, where a lot of times we make bad decisions because we're only looking at a specific frame of time.
Right.
We don't look at the whole time picture, and we can't always do that.
Right.
But when we only look at a small snippet, that tends to get us in more trouble than what's worth.
That is so true, that we don't have the view that God has of things, and too often we trust in that immediate view. And I think, we have verses like 2 Corinthians 5:7, we walk by faith, not by sight. And when we get locked into the things that we can see, which sometimes we think we can see into the near future, we can see if I do this and this and this, and then, like dominoes falling down, I'm gonna end up here where I want to be. But then we don't see the next 10 dominoes are going to knock down and destroy things. And so I think you're exactly right. And God has that longer view of things, and we need to trust His plans. Johnny.
And one of those examples in my own life is trying to apply for jobs because it's going to give me a pay raise, but it also makes it so I can't come to church on Wednesday nights or Sunday nights. Or, I'm looking at that. Well, I need this money.
Right.
I need this money, and I'm not trusting in God to see me through.
Right. I think that's a great personal example, and and a reminder, for all of us to be able to take that to that more holistic or longer view of the way that we look at things like careers or jobs or hobbies or even friendships and relationships and things that might ultimately draw us away from God, when what we should be looking for is those things that are going to draw us closer to God. Chapter 8, verses 1 through 10 contains another section of consequences. We'll look at verses 1 through 4. There's the series of announcements. Announcement 1 in verses 1 through 4 says, "Then the Lord said to me, take for yourself a large tablet and write on it in ordinary letters, swift is the booty, speedy is the prey. And I will take to myself faithful witnesses for testimony, Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah. So I approached the prophetess, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. Then the Lord said to me, name him Maher-shalal-Hashbaz. But before the boy knows how to cry out, my father or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Assyria." So announcement 1. It's like a press conference. He's announcing what's about to happen. And so the press conference takes two things. There's a sign, and the sign is the tablet, right? A literal sign. And on the tablet, he writes the words, swift is the booty, speedy is the prey. That's not necessarily a good thing. Speedy, that means that the things that are about to happen are going to unfold quickly, and that vengeance is coming. Vengeance is on the way. And so, and New American Standard uses that word booty, but I think other translations maybe say spoil. Swift is the spoil. I just like saying that word. I'm a middle school teacher. Swift is the spoil, speedy is the prey. And so, so there's a sign. He takes two faithful witnesses to kind of give credence to what's going on. And then there's a son that is born. So Isaiah says, I approached the prophetess. This is Isaiah's son we're talking about. And God says, name him Maher-shalal-Hashbaz. You know what that word means? Swift is the booty, speedy is the prey. He names his son the very thing that he wrote on the tablet. That's not a great name. Hosea and Gomer, when they had sons, God was, gave him some names for his children that were not necessarily very, very good names, but they represented the things that were going on. And so before this boy is old enough to be able to say mommy or daddy, Damascus and Israel, or Damascus and Assyria will be carried away. So this is going to unfold rather rapidly, rather quickly. That the things that not the thing that Ahaz feared, but the thing that he should have feared is about to happen, right? And that is God's plan is being unfolded. Announcement 2 comes in verses 5 through 8. Again, the Lord spoke to me further, saying, inasmuch as these people have rejected the gently flowing waters of Shiloh and rejoiced in Rezin and the son of Remaliah, now therefore, behold, the Lord is about to bring on them the strong and abundant waters of the Euphrates, even the king of Assyria and all his glory, and it will rise up over all its channels and go over all its banks. Then it will sweep on into Judah, it will overflow and pass through, and it will reach even to the neck, and the spread of its wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. So it's a water metaphor. We have the Shiloh, which is described as gentle, peaceful waters, versus the Euphrates, which was a wide and at times a roaring river. If you think of where the Euphrates is, I didn't put it in the map, but whoops, I went way back, didn't I? If you think about where that's at, where Noah's Ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat. Those mountains, the snowfall of those mountains goes down the valleys into the Euphrates River. And so during certain times of the year, that river would flood its banks, it would overflow, and it would be a raging torrent. And so you have the peaceful, gentle waters of Shiloh against the raging torrent of the Euphrates. Which one do you want flowing through your backyard? You do not want Euphrates, and that's where Assyria is. And so Ahaz was inviting this flowing, raging river into his own backyard. And once it gets there, it's not controllable. You can't You can't stop it. And so Assyria was coming, and there was going to be nothing Ahaz could do about it. And again, these events are associated with Emmanuel. Remember, Emmanuel has to have an immediate context, not just the 750 years, which we know it is. It applies there, but it's got to have an immediate context because it says, in the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. That's God being with them in the midst of all this. Verses 9, well, I skipped a whole section. Forgot to put that one in there. Verses 9 and 10, announcement number 3, says, Be broken, O peoples, and be shattered, and give ear, all remote places of the earth. Gird yourselves, yet be shattered. Gird yourselves, yet be shattered. Devise a plan, but it will be thwarted. State a proposal, but it will not stand, for God is with us. Jerusalem was a capital city, and no doubt had refugees and ambassadors from the surrounding nations that were also fearful of Assyria. And Isaiah announced that they will... that they do well to be dismayed because God has decreed their destruction. This is not going to be a good place to be. Jerusalem, if Israel and Syria surround it, no harm's going to come to them. Jerusalem, if Assyria surrounds it, bad things are going to happen. You don't want to be there. And so Ahaz was inviting Assyria in to attack Jerusalem. And once again, at the very end of that section, it says, For God is with us. That's Emmanuel. This is associated with God being with them. Final 2 minutes, we've got this in verses 11 to 22. Says, For thus the Lord spoke to me with mighty power and instructed me not to walk in the way of this people, saying, You are not to say it is a conspiracy in regard to all that this people call a conspiracy, and you are not to fear what they fear or be in dread of it. It is the Lord of hosts whom you should regard as holy. He shall be your fear, and he shall be your dread. Then he shall become a sanctuary, both to the house of Israel, a stone to strike and a rock to stumble over, and a snare and a trap for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many will stumble over them, and they will fall and be broken, and even be snared and caught. Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples, and I will wait for the Lord, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob. I will look eagerly for him. Behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are for signs and wonders in Israel, and the Lord of hosts who dwells on Mount Zion. And when they say to you, Consult with mediums and with spiritists, and whisper and mutter, should not a people consult their God? Should they consult the dead on behalf of the living? To the law and to the testimony. If they do not speak according to this word, it is because they have no dawn, and they will pass through the land hard-pressed and famished, and it will turn out that when they are hungry, they will become enraged and curse their king and their God as they face upward. Then they will look to the earth and behold distress and darkness and gloom of anguish, and they will be driven away into darkness. That is not happiness. Isaiah addresses his colleagues with 2 messages. The first section there, calm in the midst of trouble. There's going to be lots of rumors, and there's going to be conspiracies, and there's going to be sounding like bad things are going to happen. Trust God. Don't give up faith in him. He got us this far. He can see us through this. And then that last section, once again, is that command to trust in God, that they don't give up trusting in God because he got them this far. Whew, we made it. Reflections on Emmanuel. That name occurs 3 times in this section. It means God with us, and in the New Testament, the fulfillment of Isaiah 7:14 comes with the birth of Jesus. So it's an important prophecy. It's a prophecy that we know applies to the Messiah, to Jesus, to the Son of God, but it also has to have an immediate fulfillment. There has to be some context in which it means something within the things that Isaiah is saying in that passage. I'm not sure we really got into that too much because I'm not sure that the answer is obvious, but there has to be some importance to the idea of God being with them through that whole thing. Even when Ahaz is rejecting God, God still finds a way to be with his people. And he finds that way through the faithfulness of men like Isaiah and other people who follow Isaiah's message. So God is with them even though there are some people that are trying to shut him out completely. Next week, Isaiah's 9 and 10. Isaiah 9 and 10. Thank you very much.